How do you deal with that as a family?
Well, we don't, in many respects, need to deal with it.
The order did not arrive with trumpets, cameras, or a public warning. It arrived inside a sealed red folder, carried through Buckingham Palace under absolute silence. By the time Queen Camilla learned what Princess Anne had authorized, the decision had already taken effect. Her access, influence, and ceremonial privileges had been stripped under powers linked to the 1917 letters patent. And behind one closed door, a stunned royal household realized this was not a threat. It was finished. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Senior aides entered Buckingham Palace early and surrendered their phones outside a private room. No one argued. The silence told them enough. Anne stood at the head of the table beside the sealed directive, while household officers waited for her command. The 1917 letters patent, a formal royal document defining status and privilege within the monarchy, carried devastating force. Princess Anne had enforced a directive removing Camilla's crown privileges, ceremonial access, private authority, and right to use protected household resources. The decision was immediate, not a warning or temporary suspension. Camilla received the file in her private sitting room. She read the first page twice. Her fingers tightened around the chair as her private secretary watched her face lose color. "Did Charles approve this?" the Queen asked. The secretary could not answer, and that silence wounded her more than the words before her. Anne felt the cost sharply. She kept her shoulders firm and her voice level, yet she knew she was acting against her brother's wife, and risking a fracture that might never heal. Still, the Princess Royal believed delay had become more dangerous than action. Peace had protected the family, but it had also allowed uncertainty to grow. The directive had not been written that morning. Legal advisors had drafted it weeks earlier and reviewed every line, while one final condition remained unmet. Something had happened overnight, something serious enough to release the order before Charles could stop it. Across the palace, an official removed Camilla's name from a restricted access list. Another aide requested the ceremonial key she had carried since becoming queen. She placed it in his palm without speaking, but her stare followed him until the door closed. As the briefing ended, an equerry handed Anne a folded note written by Charles. 6 words waited inside. "You have done what I could not." Her expression changed. Before the palace could understand why Anne had acted, it had to confront the history linking the woman who issued the order, the queen who lost everything, and the king trapped between them. This was never simply a battle over titles, keys, or ceremonial privilege. At its center stood 3 people, bound by marriage, blood, and years of unspoken resentment. Anne believed she was protecting the crown. Camilla believed she had earned her place beside the king. Charles believed he could hold both women within the same royal structure. But as the order took effect, every compromise he had relied upon began collapsing at once, and none of them could escape the personal cost. Anne had spent her life treating duty as heavier than affection. Queen Elizabeth II, the late monarch, taught her that the royal house survives through restraint, rank, and service before comfort. The Princess Royal carried that lesson like armor. To her, protecting the crown meant stopping private feelings from becoming public power, even within her family. Camilla saw the crisis through a different wound. After decades of hostility and slow acceptance, every privilege had become proof that she finally belonged. Crown privileges, meaning the formal access and authority attached to royal service, were not decorations to the queen consort. They were recognition. Losing them felt like watching years of survival erased by one signature. Charles sat alone at his desk, with Anne's authorization open before him. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the file, and said nothing, while an aide waited near the door. The king looked less angry than defeated. He had spent years believing love could soften structure. Now the monarch faced the price of that belief. Camilla's humiliation burned more sharply. She told her private secretary that losing keys and access was painful, but being judged unworthy by Charles' sister was unbearable. The queen asked whether Anne had ever accepted her. Her secretary answered carefully, but she had already heard the silence beneath the words. William knew before Camilla did. Officials had briefed the prince privately, and although he never signed the directive, his written approval stated that the decision protected future stability. That gave senior staff confidence a later reign would not reverse Anne's action. Anne's private notes, written after the briefing, showed no language of revenge. She believed Camilla had begun confusing closeness to the sovereign with permanent control over the institution. That distinction mattered because affection belongs to a marriage, while crown authority belongs to an office. William paused outside Charles's study and rehearsed his first sentence quietly. Then he entered, saw his father's exhausted face, and abandoned every prepared word before the room fell silent. The order had been signed in silence, but its true beginning lay weeks earlier, during one ceremony when a single act of defiance turned private tension into a point of no return. Every palace crisis has a moment that later appears unavoidable. A gesture dismissed too quickly, a warning ignored, a boundary crossed in front of the wrong witnesses. For this crisis, that moment came during a private investiture at Windsor Castle. The ceremony was meant to display unity. Instead, one disputed instruction, one locked cabinet, and one cold exchange between Camilla and Anne convinced the Princess Royal that the crown's internal protections were being tested from within. Tension had already settled across the household. Ceremonial objects, confidential schedules, and private royal rooms were controlled by senior officials because each carried authority beyond personal ownership. An investiture, a ceremony in which the monarch or a senior royal formally presents honors, depended on strict rules. Anne feared those rules were being weakened whenever Charles was absent, and informal permission replaced written approval. That mattered because control over access could quietly determine which voice carried real weight inside palace walls. Camilla crossed the line during the close ceremony. She ordered a senior equerry, an officer responsible for assisting the royal household, to unlock a restricted cabinet and prepare Queen Elizabeth II's personal insignia for an unscheduled presentation. Anne had already directed that the collection remain sealed. The Queen knew that instruction, yet she told the officer to proceed. Anne entered the adjoining room and saw the cabinet standing open. She dismissed everyone except Camilla, waited for the door to close, and asked why her command had been ignored. The Princess Royal spoke quietly, but restraint made the question more dangerous. Camilla refused to retreat. She said she was the queen, and should not require permission to use objects connected to crown service. Anne answered that marriage to the sovereign did not erase constitutional boundaries, meaning the rules separating personal relationships from official royal power. Camilla then repeated a private assurance from Charles. The king had told her she could use whatever was necessary when carrying out duties in his name. Anne immediately understood the danger. A husband's promise had been transformed into institutional authority, and staff were expected to obey it without written protection. The senior equerry later gave Anne a documented account, confirming that other officers had faced similar pressure. She retrieved a dormant legal review tied to the 1917 letters patent and read it alone that evening. After Camilla left, Anne shut the cabinet, turned the key, and held it tightly before returning it to the officer. Then she called William and warned that the next breach would force her to act publicly against the Queen. What happened at Windsor remained hidden, but the warning had been delivered, and when the two women met again, neither intended to retreat. There were no secretaries in the room, no advisors to soften the language, and no photographers to preserve the illusion of unity. Anne entered carrying the signed directive. Camilla was already waiting, standing beside the fireplace with her hands locked together. The two women had survived decades of royal tension by avoiding direct collision. That protection was now gone. When the white door closed behind them, the conflict became brutally personal, and the crown's future entered the room with them. Anne had requested the meeting before the directive became visible across the household. She believed Camilla deserved to hear the reasons from her, not from frightened officials. The Princess Royal also knew that once the order reached palace departments, every restriction would become part of the official record. That mattered because private discomfort could no longer delay public enforcement. Camilla entered expecting negotiation. She believed Charles would intervene once he understood the full scale of what had been removed. The Queen Consort still trusted that marriage to the king carried enough emotional force to stop the decision before humiliation spread through the palace. "Have you ever accepted me as his wife?" Camilla asked. "Or have you only tolerated me because he demanded it?" Anne held her gaze. She answered that the crisis was not about whom Charles loved. It was about whether personal loyalty had overruled the boundaries protecting the monarchy. Camilla reached into her handbag and produced a private note from the king. Charles had written that she should use every household resource necessary to support him. Anne read it once, then placed it beside the directive. The message contained affection and trust, she said, but no constitutional authorization, formal permission to exercise power in the monarch's name. The queen pushed her chair backward so sharply that it scraped across the floor. Anne did not move. She set the signed order between them and said the restrictions had begun at noon. Camilla's anger broke into wounded disbelief. She demanded that the document be withdrawn before Charles returned. Anne's voice trembled once, but she refused. The directive had already gone to the Lord Chamberlain, the senior official overseeing the royal household, the keeper of the privy purse, who manages the sovereign's official finances, and palace security. Staff had recorded it. Even the king could not erase that fact without creating a deeper crisis. "Did William support you?" Camilla asked. Anne paused. She did not answer, and the silence told the queen everything. Yet Anne's signature alone had not made the order unbreakable. Behind her stood a carefully assembled line of authority, and at its center was a future king who had chosen the institution over family peace. The palace appeared to be watching two royal women at war, but the real balance of power had already shifted elsewhere. In a private study, William reviewed the same legal language Anne had invoked, and made the decision everyone feared he would avoid. He could protect Camilla from humiliation, or he could protect the system he would one day inherit. When he finally placed his initials beside the recommendation, the future of the monarchy became more important than family peace. William understood what the 1917 letters patent represented. The document, a formal royal instrument used to define status, recognition, and limits within the royal house, gave structure to powers that affection could never safely control. The prince knew Anne's directive would survive only if legal advisors, household departments, and custodians of crown property agreed that Camilla's privileges were conditional, not personally owned. The future king felt sympathy for her. He had watched the queen endure years of hostility before finally finding acceptance beside Charles. Yet he also feared what would happen if the king's private promises became authority without written oversight. A loving assurance could comfort a wife. It could not become permanent law. Charles summoned his son before noon. The monarch asked whether he had helped Anne, and William chose every word with care. He said he had helped prevent a future constitutional battle from becoming even more damaging. The king looked away, because the answer sounded like loyalty to the crown and betrayal of the family at the same time. William reached for the legal folder, but Charles placed one hand over it. "She will believe I abandoned her," the monarch said quietly. The prince held his father's gaze and answered, "Silence has consequences, even for a sovereign." The truth cut deeper. Charles had seen a narrower version of the restrictions days earlier. He had neither approved nor rejected it, and palace officers treated that silence as permission to continue. A legal advisor later confirmed through a written memorandum that immediate reversal would make the king appear driven by emotional pressure rather than structured judgment. Anne now held the authority to enforce the order. William gave it continuity beyond the present reign. Charles still possessed the power to intervene, but using it would damage the very institution he was sworn to protect. Before leaving, William warned Anne that enforcement was only the beginning. Once staff received the restrictions, Camilla would feel the decision through locked rooms, withdrawn duties, and quiet refusals, with no warning given. By sunset, the legal language moved from paper into real life, and the Queen began learning that privilege does not disappear at once. It vanishes door by door. The first loss was not a title announced before the nation. It was a door that would no longer open. Camilla approached a private palace corridor she had used without question for years, only to see a security officer step gently into her path. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The new access list had arrived, her name had disappeared, and the Queen suddenly understood that Anne's order was no longer language inside a folder. It was her life. Camilla stopped before the secured corridor, as the officer apologized and asked her to wait for an escort. Crown Archives, the protected rooms holding official royal records, were now closed to her without written permission. Her scheduling authority had vanished, ceremonial objects were beyond reach, and every household key had to be returned. The Queen forced a smile, thanked him, and turned away before nearby staff could see her eyes fill. The change went deeper than access. Camilla remained Charles's wife and kept her personal dignity, but the palace system no longer treated her instructions as commands from the crown. That mattered because staff once acted immediately when she spoke. Now every request required approval, turning ordinary moments into public reminders of lost authority. Charles entered her private rooms and found packed folders covering the table. Camilla asked why he had stayed silent while Anne's restrictions moved forward. The king admitted he thought there would be more time to negotiate. His answer exposed indecision, not protection, and she looked at him as though the betrayal had finally acquired a voice. The consequences spread quickly. Camilla's staff learned that several appearances would pass to Anne, Catherine, and Sophie. The Princess Royal would take ceremonial duties, while the Princess of Wales and the trusted confidant would cover community engagements. Catherine accepted with concern, and Sophie quietly asked whether the Queen had been warned. Both women understood that reassignment made the private rupture visible. Around her, sympathy and relief divided the household. A narrow possibility remained. Camilla's personal secretary found a restoration clause, allowing limited privileges to return through a formal declaration endorsed by Anne and William. The future king would therefore control part of her path back, just as his support had helped close the doors. Charles left without resolving anything. Camilla removed a small gold key from her handbag, placed it inside an envelope, and sealed it herself. Her hand trembled only once. Then she wrote to Anne. She requested a meeting without lawyers, aides, or official documents. Camilla had lost the machinery of royal power, but not her voice, and their next conversation would decide whether this ended in punishment or understanding. For the first time since the crisis began, there were no folders on the table, and no officials listening outside the door. Anne arrived without an equerry. Camilla dismissed her secretary. The Princess Royal and the Queen sat facing one another not as symbols, but as two women shaped by the same unforgiving family. One had enforced the rules, the other had been broken by them. What followed did not reverse the order, but it changed the meaning of everything that had happened. Anne chose a drawing room far from Buckingham Palace's formal offices. An equerry, a royal attendant who helps organize duties and arrangements, remained outside because she wanted no institutional barrier between them. The Princess Royal made one thing clear. She had not come to restore anything immediately. Camilla answered that she had not asked for mercy. The silence between them carried years of damage. Camilla admitted that every privilege had become proof that she was accepted. The Queen said losing access had reopened the shame of public hostility, suspicion, and the fear that she would always remain an outsider beside Charles. Anne listened without interrupting. Then she confessed that fear had shaped her decision too. Charles's declining energy and emotional dependence, she said, had made him vulnerable to choices that blurred family affection with crown authority. The Princess Royal feared that protecting her brother from pain was weakening the institution he had sworn to defend. Camilla finally revealed the motive she had kept hidden. In a recorded conversation requested for the family archive, she explained that she never intended to claim permanent power. She had relied on Charles's assurances because she feared palace officials would isolate her from him whenever his strength faded. The Queen had not been reaching for the throne. She had been fighting not to be pushed away from her husband. Anne's answer changed the room. She explained that the restoration clause, the part of the order allowing limited privileges to return, had been included deliberately. The removal was meant to establish a boundary, not erase Camilla from the family. After a long silence, Camilla slid the returned gold key across the table. Anne did not take it. She closed the Queen's fingers around it and said the key was personal now, not a symbol of command. Neither woman surrendered her entire position, yet both recognized the fear beneath the other's actions. Camilla agreed to acknowledge the limits of her authority in writing, while Anne promised that dignity, companionship, and an appropriate public role would remain protected. Their understanding could calm the family, but the world outside had already discovered the rupture, and one unforgettable public image would define it before the monarchy could explain. By dawn, the palace could no longer contain what had happened. Britain awoke to black headlines, live broadcasts, and crowds gathering beneath the gates of Buckingham Palace. Yet one image carried more force than every commentator's analysis. Camilla, arriving beside Charles for a scheduled engagement, stepping from the car without the ceremonial insignia she had worn for years. She held her head high. Anne waited inside, and millions immediately understood that the monarchy had changed before their eyes. Newsrooms called the enforcement the most severe internal restriction placed on a reigning monarch's spouse in modern memory. Palace communications released one controlled sentence, confirming that household privileges had been redefined in accordance with Crown governance. Crown governance meant the formal rules controlling royal authority, property, duties, and access. The statement avoided blame, but its restraint only made the rupture feel larger. Charles watched the coverage alone in his study. The king flinched when one commentator described him as powerless between his wife and sister, then muted the television without looking away. He knew the nation was judging his silence, and he knew Camilla would hear the same words before facing the public. Camilla refused to hide. While preparing for the engagement, she told her dresser not to replace the missing insignia with another jewel. The queen would not pretend nothing had changed. She would enter without the symbol and carry the humiliation openly, even if every camera searched for what was absent. The London Chronicle captured the mood with a front page showing the returned palace key on red velvet beneath 4 words. The crown draws the line. By mid-morning, crowds gathered near the Victoria Memorial outside Buckingham Palace. Some held photographs of Anne. Others called for compassion toward Camilla. The nation had divided between admiration for discipline and discomfort at punishment. A broadcaster then revealed, through a documented briefing from palace officials, that William's office had been consulted. The disclosure confirmed that the order carried support beyond Charles's reign. The future king had transformed a family conflict into a lasting settlement. Anne understood that this confirmation would protect the order from reversal. Inside the car, Camilla heard the crowd before the door opened. She closed her eyes, breathed once, and told Charles, "Do not defend me today. Just walk beside me." The monarch reached for her hand. Anne met them inside. Before the cameras, the Princess Royal touched Camilla's arm with deliberate care. She offered unity, but not surrender. The public had witnessed the loss. The family had survived the confrontation, and only one question remained: not whether Camilla would recover her former power, but what the crown had finally decided she was allowed to be. In the end, Anne did not destroy Camilla, and Camilla did not defeat Anne. The order remained in force. The lost privileges were not quietly restored, and royal authority was defined more clearly than before. Yet the final moment was not exile. It was Charles walking beside his wife, Anne standing ahead, and William watching from the doorway as a wounded family accepted a truth the monarchy had avoided for too long. Love and power could no longer mean the same thing. Camilla remained beside Charles, but the settlement changed what that position meant. The Queen continued public service, yet she no longer held independent crown authority or unrestricted access to protected royal resources. Crown authority meant the official power exercised in the monarch's name, and that power would now require written approval rather than private reassurance. Anne retained responsibility for enforcing the directive. William supported a permanent framework demanding formal authorization for privileges once granted through conversation or affection. The future king understood why this mattered. Unclear boundaries could preserve peace briefly, but when tested, they created a deeper crisis. Charles finally faced his part in the damage. In a private conversation recorded for the family archive, the king admitted that his silence had allowed uncertainty to grow. He apologized to Camilla for letting her believe love could protect powers that were never legally hers. The monarch did not defend his hesitation. He named it. Camilla listened, wounded but composed. She told Charles she would rather stand beside him honestly than rule through borrowed permission. The Queen accepted the restrictions without further resistance, choosing companionship over authority and dignity over a fight she could no longer justify. Anne's action was no longer seen as a personal purge. It became a hard separation between family intimacy and constitutional privilege. The formal authority attached to the crown rather than marriage. The Princess Royal had enforced what the king could not, and William would carry that lesson into the next reign. At the end of a private family gathering, Camilla approached Anne and held out her hand. The Princess Royal took it. No embrace followed. No dramatic apology came. Their brief handshake was enough. Neither woman had surrendered, but both accepted the boundary that would now protect them. The verdict was complete. Camilla lost command, not belonging. Authority, not marriage. Institutional privilege, not human dignity. Anne chose duty over ambiguity. Charles accepted responsibility, and William secured the lesson beyond his father's reign. The crown survived because the family finally stopped confusing love with power. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.